Burkina Faso has over 10 million cattle. From the Sahel plains to the green valleys near Bobo-Dioulasso, cows roam the land like living treasure symbols of status, survival, and tradition. And yet, this same country imports most of its milk from Europe. Its meat comes frozen, shipped in containers from ports thousands of miles away. Its leather often exported raw, tanned, and transformed abroad, only to be sold back at 20 times the price. How can a nation so rich in livestock be so poor in return? That's not just an economic puzzle, it's a political wound. For decades, Africa's cattle were treated like culture, but never capital. They fed families, but not futures. They grazed freely, but their value was fenced in by a lack of infrastructure, by colonial trade patterns, and by the absence of vision. But that's changing. Under President Ibrahim Traoré, cattle are no longer just animals. They are being reimagined as engines of sovereignty, as pillars of agro-industry, as economic weapons in the fight for self-reliance. This is the story of how Burkina Faso is turning cows into currency, and why the rest of Africa is watching closely. To understand the revolution Traoré is leading, we must first understand the problem it seeks to solve. In Burkina Faso, cattle have always been essential. They are not just livestock, they are wealth, bride price, ancestral legacy. In some regions, a man without cows has no name. Herds are walked for miles in search of water and grass, cared for with pride, traded in traditional markets that predate the French colonizers. And yet, this enormous biological wealth was never structured into an economy. Over 80% of the cattle sector remains informal and extensive, with low productivity, no cold chain, and virtually no traceability. Cows are raised not to be sold, but to be stored as passive capital, waiting for moments of financial stress or social obligation. Meat production is seasonal and inconsistent. Milk collection is rare and fragmented. Hides are often discarded or sold raw. According to the FAO, Burkina Faso ranks among the top 5 cattle-rich countries in West Africa, but its per capita milk consumption is one of the lowest on the continent. Most urban milk is imported from France, the Netherlands, or even India, powdered, processed, packaged. This is not just a problem of inefficiency, it is a legacy of colonial economics. The French built railways to extract cotton and gold, not to connect cattle corridors to processing centers. After independence, livestock remained too traditional for modern investment, and the global meat and dairy trade locked African nations into import dependency. Even today, the European Union floods West African markets with subsidized powdered milk and frozen chicken, sold below local production costs. Local producers lacking refrigeration, veterinary support, or investment can't compete. The result: Africa exports cows, imports meat, exports raw hides, imports designer leather. Meanwhile, livestock diseases like foot and mouth and brucellosis spread unchecked due to lack of regional coordination. Climate change intensifies droughts, forcing pastoralists into conflict with sedentary farmers, escalating tensions from Burkina Faso to Nigeria. And still, across the savannah, cattle walk. They walk without knowing that their value is leaking away. They walk in a country where cows outnumber tractors, but agriculture remains poor. They walk in silence until now, because President Ibrahim Traoré has stopped treating cows as a symbol of tradition. He started treating them as a strategic asset. Where others saw culture, he sees capacity. Where others saw chaos, he sees coordination. Where others saw cows, he sees an entire national value chain waiting to be unlocked. That's the transformation we turn to next. President Ibrahim Traoré doesn't speak about cows the way most politicians do. He doesn't call them rural assets or cultural heritage. He calls them untapped infrastructure. He doesn't ask how many cows the country owns, he asks how many jobs they can create, how many meals they can feed, how many exports they can fuel. This is not semantics. This is strategy. From his earliest months in office, Traoré made clear that livestock was no longer to be managed, it was to be mobilized. And not as a loose sector of agriculture, but as a pillar of Burkina Faso's industrial future. In closed briefings and public addresses alike, he has repeated one simple equation: cattle meat. Cattle equals meat, plus milk, plus leather, plus fertilizer, plus bioenergy, plus exports. That formula has become the blueprint for a national transformation. Instead of relying on donor-funded projects that scatter equipment and fade with time, Traoré is building an integrated livestock economy. His government is connecting the dots from pasture lands to veterinary labs, from herders to cold chains, from village cooperatives to regional markets. The goal is not just to produce more, it is to produce value. That means turning cow dung into organic fertilizer for local crops, converting slaughterhouse waste into biogas for rural electricity, establishing milk collection hubs near high-yield herding zones, reviving leather tanning facilities that once served colonial industries but now serve Burkinabe fashion designers, training youth in animal nutrition, refrigeration technology, and hide processing fields once ignored in African curricula. And critically, Traoré's vision is regional. He sees Burkina Faso not as an isolated success story, but as a node in a Pan-African livestock corridor. In coordination with Mali and Niger countries facing similar challenges, his administration is drafting protocols for cross-border animal health, joint dairy zones, and a Sahelian halal meat label that can compete in Muslim-majority export markets. For too long, Africa has allowed the world to define the value of its animals. Burkina Faso is reclaiming that right. This is not just development, it's decolonization by design. Where the West once extracted hides and left the rest, Traoré intends to process, package, and profit at home. It's a vision rooted in sovereignty, but it also speaks to something deeper. Because for Traoré, cows are not just tools of the economy. They are symbols of what is possible when an African nation stops asking what it lacks and starts using what it already has. Vision is only as strong as its execution, and in Burkina Faso, that execution has already begun quietly, methodically, but unmistakably. In the northern city of Dori, once known more for insurgent incursions than innovation, a new milk processing plant has opened its doors. Funded by domestic capital and regional development banks, the facility collects raw milk from Fulani and Mosi herders across the Sahel belt, pasteurizes it, and produces yogurt, powdered milk, and infant formula. What was once considered surplus or waste is now shelf-stable nutrition sold in urban supermarkets. This factory alone processes over 15,000 liters of milk per day, reducing dependence on European imports and stabilizing incomes for hundreds of pastoralist families. More importantly, it has trained women-led cooperatives in quality control, packaging, and micro-distribution, a grassroots revolution in itself. Further south, in Koudougou and Fadangourma, Traoré's government has established modern slaughterhouses not simply to kill, but to create value. These facilities are equipped with veterinary inspection stations, cooling chambers, and waste management systems. Meat is now traceable, hygienic, and halal certified, opening up markets in Côte d'Ivoire, Senegal, and beyond. Adjacent to each slaughterhouse is something far less flashy, but equally revolutionary: a byproduct unit. Here, bones are ground for animal feed, blood is converted into fertilizer, and hides are sent to rejuvenated tanneries, where young apprentices learn the art of leather processing using both traditional techniques and modern machinery. That leather is no longer destined to be exported raw. Under Traoré's industrial policy, 3 local cooperatives backed by training from Morocco and Tunisia have begun producing bags, sandals, belts, and upholstery for local and regional markets. In a recent trade fair in Accra, products labeled Cuir du Faso drew significant attention from West African buyers seeking ethical, traceable alternatives to Asian imports. But the transformation is not just about meat and hides. It's about rethinking the cow itself. In 5 ecological zones, the government has launched a pilot program of model dairy farms, integrating high-yield breeds, veterinary supervision, and climate-resilient fodder crops. These farms serve not just as production units, but as training hubs for agro-veterinary technicians, many of whom are recruited from youth unemployment programs. Meanwhile, a national initiative titled Fertilizer from the Herd has begun distributing biodigesters to convert cow dung into biogas for cooking and liquid fertilizer for crops, cutting reliance on imported fuel and synthetic inputs. At every step, Traoré's approach is the same. Close the loop. Capture the value. Keep it local. This is what economists call import substitution industrialization. But here, it wears boots caked in Sahel dust. It eats too with fermented milk for lunch. It moves on hooves and it powers a country forward. These are not experiments. These are infrastructures of independence. And while they may not yet dominate the GDP charts, their impact is already reshaping livelihoods, especially for the rural poor, for women, and for those long pushed to the margins of economic planning. Cattle, once a passive asset, are becoming a national workforce, and the fields of Burkina Faso are no longer just grazing grounds. They are becoming factories without walls. When you walk into a market in Ouagadougou today, you may not notice it immediately. The meat looks the same. The milk bottles are cold. The leather sandals familiar. But something has changed fundamentally. That milk. It wasn't flown in from Europe. That meat. It wasn't frozen in France and shipped across the sea. That leather. It wasn't exported raw and re-imported at 10 times the price. It was processed, packaged, and proudly produced right here in Burkina Faso. The numbers are beginning to tell the story. According to the Ministry of Agriculture, milk imports have dropped by 22% since the launch of PAC-led Plan d'Action pour la chaîne laitière, the national dairy initiative under Traoré. Local milk production, once a neglected sector, has seen double-digit growth annually, particularly in peri-urban zones where female cooperatives now handle 60% of collection and distribution. In the meat sector, over 1,500 direct jobs have been created in new slaughterhouses, cold storage units, and distribution networks. Thousands more work indirectly in feed supply, veterinary services, transport, and waste conversion. What was once a scattered, informal sector is evolving into a structured industry anchored in dignity and local control. Perhaps most inspiring is what's happening in the leather sector. The revival of tanning facilities long thought obsolete has not only retained value at home, but sparked a cultural renaissance. Young artisans now craft goods labeled Made in Faso, blending Fulani, Mossi, and Dioula motifs with modern design. Some of these artisans, once unemployed or considering migration, now export to regional trade shows, earning in CFA francs instead of risking lives for euros. But the impact goes beyond income. Traoré's livestock strategy is reweaving the social fabric of rural Burkina Faso. Women, once relegated to milking and secondary roles, are now business owners, cooperative leaders, lab technicians. Youth, once dismissed as a lost generation, are now veterinary trainees, refrigeration techs, leather stylists, pastoralists, long blamed for environmental degradation, are now partners in climate-smart grazing and biogas production. And while GDP is a crude metric for dignity, early estimates suggest the livestock value chain now contributes close to 18% of agricultural GDP, up from 12% just 3 years ago. Beyond economics, the psychological shift may be even greater. For decades, African development has been framed in terms of what the continent lacks. Not enough factories, not enough jobs, not enough expertise. But Traoré's approach turns that narrative on its head. Burkina Faso didn't wait for foreign capital to rescue its livestock sector. It used what it had: cows, communities, courage. The result is a slow but steady emancipation from dependency, from neglect, and from the idea that rural wealth must be primitive wealth. Now, cows feed cities, hides support industry, dung powers homes, and livestock once silent now speaks the language of sovereignty. No revolution comes without resistance. For all its achievements, Burkina Faso's livestock transformation still moves uphill against structural, financial, and geopolitical headwinds. The first and most visible challenge is infrastructure. In rural Burkina Faso, many feeder roads remain unpaved. Transporting fresh milk to urban centers is a logistical gamble. Cold chain networks essential for modern meat and dairy remain patchy, with frequent power cuts and limited refrigerated trucks. Veterinary labs are improving, but still under-equipped, relying on donor-funded reagents and aging microscopes. Then comes the question of capital. Building a slaughterhouse or milk plant requires millions, not just in construction, but in training, certification, logistics, and maintenance. Private investors often see livestock as too rural, too informal, or too risky. Western banks shy away from agro projects that don't fit their extractive models. Domestic capital is scarce and overstretched, but perhaps the greatest challenge is competition. The European Union continues to flood West Africa with heavily subsidized powdered milk, butter, and frozen meat. These products are cheaper not because they are better, but because they are protected by policy and underwritten by public funds. Burkinabe producers, even with superior freshness and ethical sourcing, struggle to match the price point. This isn't a free market. It's a post-colonial meat trap. As long as West Africa remains open to European agro-dumping, local industries will face an uphill climb. Traoré has begun to speak openly about tariff protections and regional trade preferences, but without continental alignment, the playing field stays uneven. Climate change also looms. Rising temperatures shorten the grazing season. Droughts drive cattle into crop zones, stoking farmer-herder conflict. Disease outbreaks like bovine tuberculosis and Rift Valley fever are escalating due to erratic weather and weak cross-border coordination. And yet, in every challenge lies a lever, because these constraints are not new. What's new is the political will to confront them, and the vision to convert them into strategic opportunities. Here's where the horizon expands. The halal market is growing fast across Africa and the Middle East. Certified meat from the Sahel can serve over 400 million Muslims if quality and logistics align. The African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, opens new pathways for Burkina Faso to export processed meat, dairy, and leather across the continent without customs barriers. The Pan-African fashion movement, hungry for local leather, is already in talks with Burkinabe cooperatives to create regionally branded ethical goods. The biogas and organic fertilizer, made from livestock waste, offer dual benefits, reducing rural energy poverty and cutting foreign fertilizer imports, which skyrocketed after global supply shocks in 2022 to 2023. Moreover, Traoré's political independence from France and the West has allowed him to court new partnerships with countries like Algeria, Turkey, and even Iran on veterinary technology, refrigeration, and halal certification. He is not just reshaping the cattle industry. He is redefining who Burkina Faso partners with, and on whose terms. For every European barrier, he's building a South-South bridge. For every limitation imposed by colonial legacies, he's designing post-colonial solutions. This is no longer just about meat. It's about sovereignty wrapped in leather, served with milk, and powered by dung. And in a world hungry for sustainable models, Burkina Faso's livestock strategy may just become Africa's new export. In the eyes of the world, a cow is just an animal, a unit of production, a source of protein, a number on a chart. But in the Sahel, a cow is more than that. It is lineage. It is memory. It is wealth in motion. And now, under President Ibrahim Traoré, it is strategy. Burkina Faso has never been short of cattle. What it lacked until now was the infrastructure, the coordination, and the political courage to make cattle the engine of a national transformation. And that courage has arrived. In speech after speech, Traoré has said Africa cannot beg for food while standing on her own herd. We will feed ourselves, clothe ourselves, and power ourselves starting with what we already own. This is more than a policy. It is a shift in posture, a new kind of pride, not the pride of aid, but of action, not dependency, but design. Today, Burkina Faso is not asking for donations. It is asking for commitment, collaboration, and return. In a national broadcast last year, Traoré turned directly to the diaspora. He said, "To our brothers and sisters abroad, engineers, investors, veterinarians, processors, your country is calling you, not for charity, but for partnership. We are building an economy of dignity, and your place is here, not in exile." He backed those words with real measures. A diaspora investment fund, specifically for agro-industrial ventures. Land access guarantees for returning professionals. Tax exemptions on capital equipment for processing cooperatives. Partnerships with Pan-African universities to accredit returning specialists in veterinary medicine. Cold chain logistics. And leather design. This is the new Burkina Faso, where a Fulani herder and a Paris-trained engineer can co-own a dairy plant, where a woman in Bobo Dioulasso can lead a leather export cooperative, where cow dung can light up a rural clinic, where the future is built not with foreign consultants, but with local genius and global solidarity. The cow is no longer a silent asset. It speaks now in milk, in leather, in labor, in life. And it calls to us all to return, to invest, to build. Because if Europe could build empires on cows, surely Africa can build freedom from the same herd. And if we do it right, our children won't inherit poverty. They will inherit sovereignty on 4 legs.